Rick Murray, executive producer of Janet Jackson. You and your team met her 5 years ago for a completely different project. So how did that one-off shoot turn into a 4-part documentary series?
It's a good question. I think the answer is with a lot of tenacity and kind of wishful thinking, it felt like to begin with. But yeah, Janet, I think the other project you're referring to is Janet, and it was looking for someone to film a behind-the-scenes tour documentary. She'd taken some time out to have a baby at the age of 50, which in itself is amazing. And she was coming back on tour after suspending her tour, and she wanted to document it. And I think from the moment we were invited, we were like, well, yeah, of course, we'd love to come and make a tour documentary with you. However, it just felt that the Janet Jackson story hadn't been told. And from day one of going out to make that tour documentary, our sort of secret mission really was to try and persuade her to do a much bigger project and to make a feature film, you know, that tells her angle of the whole story, the whole Jackson story, right?
So how confident were you that you could persuade her to sign on to this?
Well, we didn't know her, so we didn't know whether she'd be in that sort of frame of mind. I mean, all we knew about her to begin with was that she's an incredibly private person, and apart from a couple of appearances on Oprah and you know, maybe the Letterman show, she hadn't really spoken much in public about her private life, about the sort of story behind her success, the various struggles that she'd faced. And so we really went in there, like I say, with a bit of wishful thinking. But Ben, the director that we sent, he spent, you know, the whole tour with her, kind of trying to sit her down and I suppose get more out of her than just talking about that particular moment in time. And I think that, you know, about 3 or 4 weeks into it, he called me in the middle of the night, really excited, and said, we just sat down for a 20-minute interview, but it went on for 3 hours, and we spoke about everything. And a lot of that 3-hour interview formed a good chunk, actually, of the final 4-part series that we made for Lifetime. So, yeah, that shows you how in-depth that was.
Mm-hmm. That has to be the key, right? Like it's Ben Hirsch, the director. Like he has to gain her trust, right, for her to open up. I guess, and then like as you watch the show, you see that they have this like friendship, and she like teases him, and like she says his name. It's like, oh no, Ben, like, or she's like, oh, okay, that's enough, Ben, and they have like a really close bond. But like to your point about her being really private, there's a lot of sensitive topics that she has not talked in depth about that she goes into here, like starting from her childhood. So how did you guys plan to like broach those subjects with her, like knowing that Ben has formed this close relationship with her now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we described the project to her from the outset as one of those projects where this is going to be the definitive story of you. And so we have to touch on all the successes, but we also have to touch on the hard times, and we have to ask the difficult questions. And obviously we collaborated with Janet. It was an authorized doc. So she, you know, was an EP on the project and was able to work with us to sort of formulate you know, the way that we would tell her story. But what we were really clear about is that if we're going to do this, we have to answer every single question. You know, what those answers are, that's your voice. Your voice, this documentary is your voice. But we can't have people watch it and say, well, why didn't they ask her about that? And I think that is what we managed to achieve, was a sort of honest kind of roundup of everything, no matter how difficult it was. And you got to hear her views on all the sort of tricky subjects. I think how we went about it, it was so important, that relationship she had with Ben. They got on really, really well. They both had young children and kind of bonded over that. And I think that throughout her life, she's had guys follow her around with cameras, but it's never actually amounted to the big documentary. So we were kind of nervous that he might be another one of those guys. But we did manage to actually take it from that process through and see the documentary released, which we were delighted about. And I think it was just persistence on Ben's part. And he just asked the questions, and sometimes she wasn't in the mood to answer them, and sometimes she was. And eventually, over the course of 2 or 3 years of filming, we kind of had everything that we needed to sort of join all the dots in her story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, as you watch, it becomes clear that the theme of the series and also her life and career is about control, no pun intended. But when did you guys realize that as you were filming her and talking to her through the years?
Yeah, definitely super early on, because that first 3-hour interview session that Ben did, it was kind of like a therapy session. We were like, come on, take us all the way back to the start. And she was talking about all the big influences in her life, which were her dad, her brothers, especially Michael, and then, her music kind of came out of those relationships, and what those control was about, her taking control back from her father. And certainly, I think a lot of the music that she released in the late 80s and 90s, she wasn't in direct competition with Michael, but she felt this pressure to perform because her brother was Michael Jackson. So everything she did was kind of shaped by those relationships in her life, especially the male relationships, all the way up to the Super Bowl and her relationship with Justin Timberlake and their friendship around that, and the huge kind of scandal, that saw it being, blasted through the White House and huge fines handed out to networks. So we just saw this common theme of control and her trying to grasp it, usually from men. And so then you're looking at really interesting themes there of sexism and sometimes racism, and the way that the industry treats people, especially women and women of color, which, I think is a fascinating backdrop for her career, which is still a record-breaking career, against the odds, really.
Yeah, for sure. And you guys also had so much home video footage that one of her ex-husbands, Renee Elizondo, he filmed. And then we see how, even through those home videos, how their relationship deteriorated and why they divorced and everything. And again, like you're saying, it's like the male figures in her life and the need for control. And but I love some of the footage that you guys included, like her and Michael writing Scream in his bedroom apartment in New York. And then there's also her arguing with Jimmy Jam in the studio because he wanted more energy out of her as she was laying down a track, and she just walks out the studio. So can you talk about just combing through all that footage and just finding all this stuff that no one has ever seen before, the public, I mean?
Yeah. Well, it all sat in a lockup in LA somewhere, and during lockdown, she said, I'm going to send you my personal archive. We're like, okay, cool. Roughly how many tapes or drives? So she said 7,000 tapes. This is her archivist, 7,000 tapes. So we basically had everything from the kind of mid-70s, everything she was involved in. If she was given a copy of it or a rough cut for review, she kept it, she put it in her archive. So we ended up with both, cuts of never seen before cuts that other people had shot of her work, but also her own huge personal archive, her home videos. And Renee, her second husband, was a cameraman and kind of took it upon himself to film almost a decade of her life, which was amazing. And he was one of those guys who filmed her already and it hadn't come to something. And we got that wonderful gift in the post during lockdown. And we started the process, and it took a huge team months to go through everything with a fine tooth comb. And, amongst the kind of, videos of Renee paintballing or playing golf, then suddenly he'd be in the studio filming the creation, the moment that they created Rhythm Nation, which, like I say, is still a record-breaking hit to this day. It was the biggest selling premiere tour, first-time tour of any artist ever. And there they are, just creating it in the studio. And then even better for us as documentary makers, oh my God, they're falling out over it. They're getting stressed because they've been there for, I think something like 3 months, and the record company are trying to get in and they're keeping them out. And you can just see the tensions rising a little, even though they're all really good friends, and the creative process is fascinating to see. And I wish we'd had more time to dig into that creative process. You know, I really enjoyed the Get Back documentary that Peter Jackson directed, just because it's all about that creative process. And there was certainly a whole nother series we could have made just about how she collaborated with Jimmy Jam in that studio. But certainly in the time that we had, we just tried to tell the story of this pressure mounting and how they reacted to that. And of course, in the end, you know, an amazing track was forged under all that kind of duress, which is testament to those guys, basically.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I think, you know, everyone was probably or definitely waiting to hear her talk about the Super Bowl, because she's kept quiet for the majority of over the years, you know, I guess, what is it now? 18 years? Yeah, 18 years.
Yeah.
And yeah, I like how that segment was shot, because it's a conversation between her and Randy, because Justin asked her to appear when he was headlining in 2018, and she's like, I would love to, but I can't do it. It's just like too much baggage. And then she talks about how right after it happened back then, that she told him not to say anything, like she wanted to protect him. And I think nowadays, you know, her fans like understandably are in her corner trying to protect her and think that she was wrong, but she was looking out for Justin. And I think that's such an interesting new perspective on it. Like, were you surprised about that when they talked about that?
Yeah, we were, because the kind of the narrative now is that Justin, you know, was I guess hung Janet out to dry, because he was there still being invited to the award ceremonies, still allowed on CBS. She was banned, and that ban continued for like well over a decade, I mean 15 years, whilst he was still in the limelight. So he was the enemy. But in a way, that's, again, it's like the public misconstruing what had happened, because, you know, in the first place, it was kind of the media and the public who kind of blew the whole thing up and then pointed at Janet and said, well, she's to blame. It was her birth. She's to blame. So everyone jumped on her. And then kind of 15, 20 years later, everyone jumps on Justin. But I guess the reality is that those guys are friends, and that they've been trying to deal with this like crazy storm, and what to say in public, and everything they would say would come back to bite them in some way. And I think that she just wanted to protect him and his mental health as well as her own, because the whole thing is pretty nuts, the way that the world reacted to that. And you know, we did a lot of research on it and spoke to a lot of people who were working at the FCC at the time, and you know, everyone, actually, even the people doing the job and handing out the fines, thought this is a bit crazy, but we've kind of got to go with it, because both Bush and Hillary Clinton are there in the Senate kind of talking about this. We've got to do something and kind of act in a certain way. So it just felt like, you know, a hysteria, really. And those guys are just friends. Like, they're not enemies as a result of it. So hopefully that came across in the show and the way that, you know, she described events. But of course, she just doesn't want to go back there and publicly kind of really, you know, make up at the suit or go back to the Super Bowl. She just wants to move on from it, you know.
Yeah, for sure. And like, she's, you know, released that video as well, like urging fans to move on. Like, she appreciates the support, but it's time to move on, and like, they're friends. And she's, I guess, maybe forgiven is like the wrong word to use too, because it was like an accident. But and I guess it's more of like an indictment of like the media and how they treat women, especially back then as well. And you see how her career and his career trajectories were completely different. But like, to that point, it ends with her induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And it was just kind of, you know, like the last couple of years, it was like a new appreciation of her career. Like, everyone was like, we've like treated her like crap since the Super Bowl. And, you know, every Super Bowl is like Janet Jackson Appreciation Day. So can you talk about like how, you know, filming like over the past 5 years, like when that just kind of like coalesced to that point, is like, this is kind of like perfect that like she's getting her due and getting inducted?
Well, it was amazing, because when we set out filming, there are a few things really that she didn't have closure on at that point, and that closure kind of came during the filming period. And I think certainly that was a huge one for her and her career. You know, she'd been eligible, I think, for nearly 10 years to be in the Hall of Fame, but she hadn't been accepted by the committee, despite a lot of lobbying. And of course, with the Me Too movement, people started looking back at the mid-noughties and the early sort of 2000s and saying, well, hold on, why did we behave like that? What were we thinking? Like, was it actually fair to treat her like that, but not treat Justin in the same way? And actually, was it an overreaction? And I think suddenly with that hindsight, you know, not just the board of the Hall of Fame, but probably America moved on from it. And it's great to see her getting all the kind of accolade now that she deserves, because there was a kind of wilderness period of well over a decade where she, you know, people kind of didn't erase her from history, but she wasn't talked about as much as a legend like that probably should be, right? So I think that was a great sort of, you know, that happening in 2019, huge piece of closure on her career, and means she can sort of finally move on from it, which is a lovely end to the series for us, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Rick, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time. James Honeyborne, executive producer of our great national parks. This is a gorgeous love letter to national parks all over the world, and is executive produced and narrated by Barack Obama. So how did you guys link up with the former president?
Well, we were introduced to the president and Michelle Obama's production company, High Ground, through Netflix. And High Ground and my production company have both entered into a creative partnership with Netflix at around the same time, and it quickly became apparent that we shared common interests. So it felt like a real natural fit to get together and talk about this. And the president is actually recognized as the president in all of US history who's saved more wilderness than anyone else. So he's got a real sort of authenticity to tell this story. It's really the story of the importance of wilderness all over our planet, wild places. They're not empty places. They're incredibly important to us. And in a world that is, you know, facing so many environmental challenges, it's a good news story. It's a great news story to share. That wilderness is actually really important, and that by protecting over 4,000 national parks worldwide, we are actually saving not only amazing numbers of species, plants and animals, but also giving ourselves a better chance, because we all need these wilderness areas if we ultimately are going to survive ourselves.
Was he like always on board to narrate from the beginning, or did that come along later in the process? Because I think it's very effective to have him be the narrator, you know, because it's so much about like people's relationship with the wilderness, like you said, but to have him being like the vessel to like deliver this message as well.
Well, so when we started developing it, we weren't sure, but it quickly became apparent that he had a real interest and passion for the subject. And of course, you say it's about our relationship with wilderness, and it felt just so appropriate for him to tell us that story that it quickly became apparent that would be the way to go.
What was it like filming with him and then recording with him in the booth?
Right, yeah. So I did the commentary recording in the booth, all 5 episodes. We did them on separate days, and that was initially quite daunting. But he puts you at ease so quickly, and he'd also done you know, his prep work, and we were just so thrilled to see that he really had a passion to tell the story, and had thought about his lines and delivered them. He was quite a one-take wonder, really. We filmed in 2 locations on the ground. We filmed in Hawaii, where we have that lovely opening to the series, and the very sort of personalized story of his relationship with wilderness from even being in his mum's stomach. You know, this idea that as a baby, before he was born, he was you know, so calm because he was visiting the sea regularly with his mum. You know, it's a lovely story, and I think straight away sort of immersed us in a very sort of personalized perspective. I didn't direct that. Our series producer, Sophie Todd, who was the series producer of Formula One Drive to Survive, she films people more than I do. I'm more of the animal person. So we're in the middle of lockdown. Sophie got to go, and you know, that was obviously the right call. But she enjoyed filming both in Hawaii and in Yellowstone National Park, where we other segments of the series were filmed.
Yeah. So the series spans 5 continents, I believe. How did you guys go about choosing the parks to cover? And like you said, like Obama has personal ties to some of these locations. Like you guys go to Kenya, his dad was born in Kenya.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we had, there were over 4,000 parks to choose from. So, and each one's got an amazing story to tell. And of course, our framing for the storytelling was to take a very contemporary look at each park, to frame it within the animal's perspective. So let the wildest residents of each location tell us about their park through experiences in their lives. We wanted to have a range of habitats. So we wanted one underwater, for example. So that became the Monterey National Marine Sanctuary. We wanted one in the rainforest, and that became Gunung Leuser National Park in Indonesia, which is the last place on Earth where you get elephants and orangutans and rhinos and tigers all in the same jungle habitat, which is just amazing. So as we were trying to narrow it down, we knew we wanted to be on different continents, different parts of the world, in different habitats. And then we looked closely at where the president had a previous experience and previous relationships. And he actually grew up in Indonesia for a bit. So there was really, for every episode, an opportunity to find a place that felt personal to him. And I think that also helped with the, his authentic sort of tone of voice in the series.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Well, since you film all the animals, I've been talking about some of these never before filmed animals that is in the series, because there's like a hammerhead worm in Indonesia, I think, that's never been discovered.
That's seriously gross. That animal is great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a wonderful thing. We wanted to film a hammerhead worm, and I believe we've discovered a new species in doing so, because it's not scientifically recorded, this worm. But what hammerhead worms are, they are a very primitive creature. They don't even have eyes, but they squirm along on the forest floor, and they're looking for the trails left by slugs and snails. And when they find them, they follow the trail and track down the slug or snail and then devour it. They sort of surround it with their bodies, squeeze tight, and actually ingest it through a mouth in the middle of their stomach. So in the middle of their body, and they sort of engulf it and digest it and leave very little behind. So it's a kind of grim little story, but very entertaining because of the creatures and the way they go about. And it's so extraordinary that everywhere you look in a rainforest, there still are opportunities to discover new species and film things that haven't been filmed before. It kind of tells us how little we still know about the natural world.
Yeah, definitely, because I think another one was how mongooses crack open snails. Yeah. They use like their hind legs and throw it against logs, right?
Yeah, it's kind of the American football impression, I think. And it's cool because we didn't know that dwarf mongooses did that, and it hadn't been recorded in that part of Africa. And effectively, they're using a log behind them, rather like a sort of anvil, to crack open the snail. And they hurl the snail between their back legs using their front legs, and it smashes against the log, and that's how they get inside. So again, that was just a new little bit of behavior. But we put out all sorts of new bits of kit. We wanted to film animals and reveal new sides to their behaviors. We had a low light camera that was able to film at nighttime in color. So we were with the black rhinos when they were at their waterhole nighttime party, which became a bit of a bit of a violent affair, actually, but that was an amazing sort of scene to watch and to witness the way these animals behave at sort of out of hours when we normally wouldn't be able to see them. And in Indonesia, we wanted to get right up to the high mountain tops that stick out above the rainforest in the Leuser ecosystem, and that involved a 10-day trek for our camera team just to get up to these mountain tops through really leech-infested forests. When they came back, their clothing was dripping with blood, but they were able to get up into this very high area and leave remote cameras out and actually get some very rare footage of Sumatran tigers in the wild in this incredible moorland landscape. So we got some really precious views just through that sort of determination, patience, resilience through the crew's abilities to put up with a lot of discomfort. So we're very grateful to everyone we filmed in. And
I love the night vision footage, because I was just expecting it to be, you know, the usual like green color, like night vision, you know, but it was in color and it looked amazing.
Yeah, there's enough color on a moonlit night. There's enough color for these cameras to be sensitive to it, which is extraordinary.
Is there any animal or anything that did not make the final cut that you wish did?
Do you know, we got very lucky. We actually managed to, you know, we got on and managed to film the animals we did. We were filming a lot in lockdowns and during the pandemic years, so it wasn't easy. The good side of that was that we relied an awful lot on local crews. So, for example, we had an entirely Chilean crew in Patagonia, and that enabled us to be more fleet of foot and stay with the animals, even when international travel wasn't possible. There was one occasion we were stuck in the offices in Bristol wanting to film a giant flower that stands 10 foot tall and is only blooms for 2 days. And we were wanting to articulate to the team on the ground how we might film it best. So we built a half life size, a 5 foot tall papier-mâché model in Bristol in England, and did camera moves around it with our iPhones, and then sent those over as sort of visual references and to go with the storyboards, so that our teams on the ground, you know, could follow that, and brilliantly they came back with exactly what we'd asked for and more. So actually working during lockdown, it was very challenging, but we were well supported by Netflix, and it was really a great opportunity for so many of our local colleagues on the ground. And it was great to see them shine, you know.
Well, James, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you back in a little bit.
Okay.
Ron Howard, your latest documentary, We Feed People, follows Jose Andres's incredible nonprofit World Central Kitchen, which provides meals in disaster zones. So when did you first hear about it, and when did you first approach Jose about doing a documentary?
I first heard about it when both of us were speakers at a conference, and so I saw his talk and got to know Jose a little bit, and it was very impressive. This was maybe 7 years ago, I'd say. Maybe he I'm not even sure he used the label, the name World Central Kitchen, but he did talk a lot about Haiti, which was sort of his first foray into a really full-on activation, which began really with just him and a couple of people and his credit card showing up. And so he told this incredible story of him sort of applying what he had learned as an entrepreneur. You know, he owns restaurants and as a chef, the chaos of the kitchen and so forth. And it was a great talk, inspiring, very entertaining. And I spent some time with Jose and found him to be fascinating. He's loves history, knows a lot about popular culture and movies, and he's just a fascinating person to talk to. Well, so I became more aware of him, and occasionally I'd see him on the news, but I wasn't really following him. Later, when I was doing the documentary Rebuilding Paradise, which was about the aftermath, we covered about a year in the town of Paradise, California, that had been 90% destroyed in a fire. We were doing this documentary, and Jose shows up in it. I wasn't there when we covered him, but he was there as part of the relief effort. And Luisa Velas, who's one of the executive producers of both Rebuilding Paradise and We Feed People, she and I were looking at the cut, and she said, Jose Andres, he's amazing. He's becoming a story. Maybe that's another film, because I think he's going to win the Nobel someday. It's just amazing what he's doing. So then I did a deeper dive and found that the National Geographic executives, Courtney Monroe and Carolyn Bernstein, who we were working with, were dying to do something with Jose. So then I began to pursue Jose myself, along with Justin Wilkes and Sarah Bernstein from Imagine Documentaries. And he was a little reluctant at first, but when he realized I didn't want to just do, a biographical look at him, I was really interested in World Central Kitchen and volunteerism, and how it worked, how they worked as a team, how he led the team, and eventually he agreed to let us go in on them, and it was well, I learned much more obviously as we got into the project.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you've said before that you like stories about families, and I think that it really comes through that like everyone who works with and for like World Central Kitchen is like a family, like that volunteerism, like they're all in it together.
I feel that. I mean, I often say, and this doesn't hold for all of my projects, scripted movies over the years, or the documentaries, I suppose, but I'm also interested in teams, which to me begin to feel like families, as you're saying. In this case, Jose's family was not really supposed to be a part of it, and the film evolved a lot as we undertook it. We learned a lot as we went along, and the big question was, yes, it's a wonderful thing, and let's follow it, and let's allow people to understand on a kind of granular level, how they function, what their culture is, and how they get so much done, and and I think it's inspiring and revealing in a lot of ways there, but hard to know where the narrative was, and a few things shifted and changed. One was that by the time we were actually covering World Central Kitchen with, cameras in the field with them, they had evolved. They were not only well established, and yes, we covered a couple of activations, Canary Islands and the Carolinas and a couple, but COVID struck. And their new challenge had more to do with scale. How do we settle in and help a community survive long term? How do we matter? Not because we delivered 100,000 meals over a short period of time where people really needed it. How do we do millions of meals? And how many people can we activate? And how much can we grow this? And powerful, interesting, because it's another level of organization. There are other kinds of complications. In some ways, things became a little bit more political. But the narrative was fairly clear. So as Andrew, the editor, and I began looking at the footage that already existed, going back to Haiti, and Puerto Rico, and which was a key turning point, the Bahamas, we found within this 1,000 hours of footage that World Central Kitchen actually had building blocks that became an origin story. So it became a little bit less a kind of granular look at how they function, and a little bit more of, oh, here's a journey in a fairly short period of time, led by this very charismatic guy who became a kind of magnet for a lot of other, incredibly dynamic people and committed people. And how did that work? And that became a very different story to us. And we began reshaping it. It was really interesting to see it shift. We got excited when we began to understand that what we were covering was really sort of Act 3. But in all of this, I realized that as the kind of alpha volunteer, that a thing that Jose had kind of been reluctant about needed to be discussed again. I said, we really do need to talk to your family, because we need to understand that the kind of commitment that you and many people offer up, or even shorter term commitments that people might make, you know, under dire circumstances, when that we need to understand what it means to the family. We just do. And he, you know, again, didn't want to draw them into it or make it be about him, but he understood the value of that, and also giving us more insight into his past, his parents, kind of people they were, and his, and you also recognize that he didn't just, you know, he sort of tells this story that he was, you know, upset by what he witnessed on Katrina, but he never did anything, you know, about New Orleans. Then when Haiti struck, he said, maybe I can help. But you realize it began with his parents. And I mean, he was in 22, there was this, you know, this mentor, Robert Egger, who made a huge impact on him. So I wanted to sort of celebrate volunteerism through the kind of this case study, this character study, along with understanding how World Central Kitchen could go from, you know, a couple of guys and a credit card with a limit on it, to, you know, achieve what they're achieving now.
I love calling it an origin story, because it's like an origin story of a superhero, really. And
it's pretty heroic, and you know, it's humbling to me, because you know, I am and now they're in a war zone. You know, I mean, our film was long put to bed before Ukraine, and but I mean, this is yet another level, and you know, they're there, and Nate Mook is there, and there, you know, it's Sam. I mean, so many people I know now are you know, they're in the middle of it, and so far so good. They had some injuries on one missile attack, but nothing terribly serious, thank God.
Yeah, it's amazing. And well, you know, every superhero has a sequel, so maybe one day we'll get the sequel. You can do.
He's a fascinating guy. Who knows? I mean, I think, and we began to brush up against this and cover this. That I do think he's begun to see that World Central Kitchen demonstrates, it almost works as a pilot program. I think somebody even says that in the film, and it's quoted, that for other kinds of projects and ways of approaching you know, challenges in society. And you know, I think to some extent, I think they're interested in seeing if they can influence policy in you know, in some positive ways that are consistent with what their aims are.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Ron, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time, and we see you back here in a little bit.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Amy Poehler, Lucy and Desi is your documentary directorial debut, and I know the one and only Ron Howard brought this to you. So how did this all go down?
Yeah, Imagine, the great Imagine, and Ron and Whitehorse approached me about this idea, and I was so thrilled, first of all, that they had thought of me for this project, but also because I was very scared, and that's a good sign for me usually, that it's something I should try.
I've read some interviews with you, and you've said like you kind of, your angle into this was that you wanted to make them more 3D, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, because you feel like they've been too just like lionized as these like mythic creatures. And I think you really avoided the film becoming this like hagiography of them, with this backbone of their relationship from like how they met and all the way through their divorce, and then until like they both died. So how did you land on centralizing the through line, like on the relationship like that?
Well, thank you for saying that. I think that was, you know, I have in the doc space, there's often this obligation or assignment to take people into a world that they don't know and to tell them about people that they should know. And we had the opposite problem with Lucy and Desi. How do we make these iconic, larger than life, incredibly famous people seem like human beings, which they are. They're, you know, mothers and fathers and lovers and friends. So we kind of had to work from that, which was how do we connect with them as people? And I think, you know, the way to connect with a lot of people's stories is to see in what way they choose to love. So the love story of Lucy and Desi became the framing element for the film. And, you know, their actual love story is kind of a 3-act structure. So we used that to try to shape the film and also just to keep us interested, even if you knew nothing really about their work, or, you know, we really wanted to make a love story.
For sure. And the film, I think it's so effective because you have these audio tapes from themselves. I think for Desi is the audiobook for his memoir. And for Lucille, I think she did like a really lengthy interview, right? And those are just like audio tapes.
Yeah, we stumbled across this incredible treasure trove. Lucille Ball had done a long interview with Betty Hoffman, a writer at Ladies Home Journal. And that became an interview that she enjoyed the experience so much that she started working with Betty about a possible book. And so all of the stuff we heard was very raw, unedited stuff of her talking to Betty with the hopes that it would someday, you know, be put into a book. And then Desi had recorded his own audiobook, but we also found a lot of found audio. And when I say we found, Lucy Arnez Luckinbill, Lucy and Desi's daughter, who is an incredible protector of the estate, opened her doors for us, literally. And they found this very special box of stuff that had been tucked away. So once we got Desi and Lucy's voice in the film, it changed the way I think how we feel about the film, because we really want Lucy and Desi to feel present, alive, and of this moment, because they certainly are.
Yeah, definitely. I love one of the quotes from one of the talking heads you have in there, Laura LaPlaca from the National Comedy Center, I believe. And she said that she hates when people call Lucy's comedy or her work effortless, because she worked hard at it. And I loved it so much because it really dispels this notion that she could do this in her sleep. And she's always talking about like how she doesn't think she's naturally funny. But I think it was also a very keen point because in the way it applies to like a lot of successful women, like people think things come easily to them. And I think maybe also in comedy as well. Do you see those parallels there when she said that?
Yeah, I think comedy and in some ways music are two disciplines that people, if done right, looks easy. So people can watch good comedy or they can watch great music and they can sit down at a piano and be like, I'm going to do this, or they can try. And it's not easy. And, you know, I think Lucy really took great pride in how hard she worked. You know, her love language was acts of service, and she really she did things for people, and the doing and the action was like the way she operated her life. And she worked really, really hard. She studied. She did not consider herself a natural comedian. You know, she came to comedy by way of acting, and so she studied with the greatest. You know, she studied with Buster Keaton and Red Buttons, and she took, she followed every director and actress around that she worked with, and she cared very much about rehearsal. And so I think that point is to say that although Lucille Ball has incredible gifts, she took her job very seriously and she worked really hard, and as did Desi. But interestingly enough, Desi was much more of the natural, less he wasn't as interested in rehearsal. He wasn't as interested in running it over and over again. So they both approached work in very, very different ways.
I also love that you really give Desi his due, because I think sometimes he's overlooked in the I Love Lucy, Lucille Ball of it all. But he really transformed the way television is made, that, you know, a lot of innovations that we still use today. So what was it like finding the right elements in his, you know, very long and successful and also unconventional life, and what to put into the documentary, like starting from his life in Cuba and coming over here?
Yeah, well, what Desi and Lucy shared was, you know, a woman and a Cuban American, you know, man of color in the 1950s was not allowed to be part of the room. They weren't in the room making decisions. So they were both certainly outsiders, outliers. But Desi's story is a really amazing one. It is a story of lots of early childhood trauma, which is a word that generation not only didn't use, but didn't know about. But it's also a very truly American story. It's an immigrant story of a kid who gets here at 13, having been, you know, chased literally out of his country, a country that he misses desperately when he lives in the US. But he becomes this self-made, incredible story of capitalism and success. And all the while, he is straddling a very, you know, two very separate identities. And, you know, we spoke to so many young people who were, you know, really wanted to underline the fact how important it was to see a high status Cuban man on TV, elegantly dressed, in charge. Yes, with an accent, but never one that was made fun of or belittled. Just his status alone on TV was so groundbreaking. And the fact that him and Lucy were married on TV as well as in real life was incredibly groundbreaking at the time, and people forget about that. So yeah, we really wanted to make sure that Desi's story was told, because it is often the story that people don't know enough about.
Yeah. I also like that you guys reminded everyone that I Love Lucy only lasted 5 seasons, but it feels like it went on for like 20 years. And I also, like, to your point before about like the 3-act structure, I think you could have ended the film when the show ended, but you go on and you show like how they still had this loving relationship after they divorced. So what do you think is the eternal appeal, enduring appeal of the show and of them?
Well, you know, what's interesting is, you know, we were not making a documentary about I Love Lucy. So we were really interested in those 25, 30 years after the show ended almost, where not only were Desi and Lucy still connected and in relationship, even though they had moved on to new relationships, but Lucy was still working. I mean, Lucy was working. She was on 3 TV shows after I Love Lucy, and in the public eye. And, you know, whether it's, you know, doing stuff with Carol Burnett on her show, or, you know, the many sitcoms she did after. So that 3rd act, I think, is where a lot of discovery comes from, because when we fall in love with people on television, we think when we turn off the television that those people don't exist. And when people leave TV shows, we think they've just kind of jumped off a proverbial cliff. But Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, the producers, went on to build the careers of so many people, to produce so many shows, and to continue to work. And I think that, you know, not only is their story a story about, frankly, the American dream, and also a story about meeting the right person at the right time, but they're both a story about longevity, that, you know, that there's really no age that is the time where you're supposed to stop making art. And I think Lucy especially dug in her heels and proved that by example. And, you know, Lucy did things, she didn't say things. So she didn't tell people that's what she was doing, she just did it.
Yeah, that's more effective anyway.
I agree.
Well, Amy, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time. You get to stay on.
Joyce.
Welcome to our Meet the Experts documentary panel. We are joined today by Rick Murray from Janet Jackson, Amy Poehler from Lucy and Desi, James Honeyborne from our great national parks, and Ron Howard from We Feed People. Thank you all for being here. I love all of your projects, and I think one thing that's clear from speaking with all of you is that you're very passionate about your subjects. And I guess, what is the most rewarding part of documentary filmmaking? Amy, let's start with you, since this is your first documentary.
Oh, great. Well, there's a lot, but I think that the most rewarding part is the very simple idea of telling a story. Really is shaping a story, is the idea that there's a lot of stories to tell with all of the material that you get, and there's a lot of stories in each one of us. Everyone has their version of story. So I think for me, the most exciting thing was working hard to tell a story, and the shaping of that, figuring out what is the part that is the best way to tell the story, and what's the part that's another story to tell for another time.
Rick, what about you?
The most rewarding part of it, did you say? Yeah, I think it's probably when the actual, obviously when you finish the project and it goes out and you finally get that audience reaction, because I'm sure all of our projects took a long time. But this one in particular took many years to come to fruition, 2 years to make, and then having spent a long time sort of scratching our heads in the edit, working out the nuances of the story and the flow of the story, and then to hear the audience kind of talking about it and noticing the things, the little Easter eggs, and kind of coming away with the sort of opinions that you kind of wanted them to form about the different characters. That's really rewarding, and definitely the best bit. Obviously, until then, you're just in a constant state of stress until it's actually finished.
Yeah, that's the process with everything, right?
Yeah.
Ron, you've made a lot more documentaries in recent years, and what is the most rewarding part for you, and like the appeal of docs for you now?
Well, I probably would have been a history teacher if I like a high school history teacher, and maybe the basketball coach or something like that. If I didn't transition from a kid career and get to fulfill my dreams, which I was lucky enough to be able to do, becoming a filmmaker. I was always a little bit so I've always been curious, always interested. And so there's that part of it. There's this discovery, but I've just, I've had this experience doing scripted projects over the last 25 years or so, where many of the films I've done over that time have been based on real events. I'm pleased to discover that a lot of that there's more similarity to the sort of the disciplines than I necessarily expected. So I'm able to apply a lot of myself and even use my past experiences to help find that story, as Amy was talking about, and help shape it. So it really, it satisfies that for me, a kind of just a curiosity and the desire to really dig deep. I'm fascinated by the differences in the medium as well, and I feel like I'm learning a lot. I feel like my scripted work actually is evolving a little bit as a result of my work in documentaries. But last, I've got to say, I love collaboration. That's really what I take away from almost every experience, is how exciting was the journey, how interesting was the problem solving, and I love the fully dedicated documentarians. These career documentarians are great people. They're smart, they're interested, they're adventuresome, they're every bit as creative as anybody working in any aspect of the business. And I just love those associations. I love those conversations, and I love the point of view, and I find it incredibly satisfying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, James, what about you?
I think it's the opportunity to give nature a voice. Actually, I think in this series we're talking about the importance of wilderness, and wilderness is home to countless wild animals and plants, and they can't really, they're not very good at standing up for themselves. So I think the opportunity as wildlife filmmakers, for us to represent those creatures and to hopefully immerse viewers in their world, and take them to meet those creatures on their eye line, and to experience their lives, often at sort of pivotal and dramatic moments. That's incredibly exciting, because if it's done well, it can transport you into another animal's perspective, and you can have empathy for any creature, from a whale to a wasp. You can actually come to care for it, and that's kind of like a critical first step for us. If we can get people to connect and care with wild creatures, then maybe we can make some impact.
Mm-hmm. And you can discover new creatures while you're at it too, so
Sometimes.
What subject would you like to see a documentary on, whether or not you make it? Rick, let's start with you.
That's a really good question. I think like some of the thornier subjects, even with the advent of Netflix, we're now seeing like those films that would only be like in an art house cinema somewhere reaching the mainstream. I would have said, like exploring something as interesting as, say, death, but making it amusing and interesting and accessible. But again, Kirsten Johnson did that recently with that amazing film on Netflix about her father. So I think there are very few subjects that aren't done. For me, I'm really now looking, after the Janet Jackson project, about what other great stories there are out there that can take us back to that era of the 80s and 90s, and what other great icons there are. So for me, I feel like it's my job to find the next Janet Jackson, really, and what the great stories are that haven't been told yet. But wow, it's a bum fight out there to find great stories for documentaries. It's not easy.
Mm-hmm. Those are two great decades to mine from, though. So
people love being transported
Amy?
back there. That's the thing. Sorry.
Yeah, for sure. Amy, what about you?
I have an idea of what I wanted to work on, but I'll just say that it's exact opposite of the glamour of Hollywood. It would be lots of digging and lots of machines. But I think I would like to get into the idea of the building and constructing of something, because I find, like Ron said, I think that collaboration and teamwork, when told well, is just the most inspiring thing to watch as well as participate in. And so I'm very moved by when people come together to solve a problem. I always think that those films just become very moving, and I'm really excited for Ron's new feature about just that. And so I think that that kind of world where there's a lot of heads together trying to fix something that doesn't seem to be fixed, it's just, I'm especially in these days very drawn to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the process, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
I love those two. James, what about you?
Well, I love all these ideas. I think for me, the documentary I would love to see made is one that happens in the future, and it's about the incredible recovery of the world's oceans, and having made Blue Planet 2 and witnessed some of the horrors of plastic pollution in the ocean, for example, to think that there might at some point in the future be a world where these things, where we've got a handle on these big crises, the big issues that affect the planet, and that we can actually have agency and we can actually improve them. That would be the exciting documentary I'd like to make, but I guess I might be an old man by then.
Hopefully that's not too long off, so fingers crossed. Ron, what about you?
First, I can't let Amy's, she teed up a plug there for me, and I just want to say the title. The movie's called 13 Lives, and it's about it's a scripted version of the rescue of the boys' soccer team in Thailand from the flooded cave. So we recreated that, and it was an exciting project to work on. And yeah, it reflects that sort of teamwork. Well, I'm already underway on a documentary subject that I'm really excited about. I think it's a great story, but also an interesting cinematic opportunity. And it's the story of Jim Henson and his kind of this restless drive and creativity and so much innovation, and yet in his own way, you know, touched so many lives, generations of kids. But there's he's a very interesting guy and inspiring in a lot of ways, and fascinating. Subjects that I'm curious about, I don't know, and I haven't found my way into these stories, so I'm going to say them, and
people can pick it up here.
Maybe somebody will pick them up and do them, because I'm fascinated by sort of educational reform and what it means and how it can work and what else is out there and what's possible, and I don't know how to shape it into a story or a subject or I would have by now. And the other one is working and family homelessness, which is to me a real shame. It's a tragedy, and it's, I know it's only a fraction of the homeless population, and only reflects a portion of the crisis, but in many ways it's one of the most unacceptable aspects of a wholly unacceptable circumstance. And so, one of these days it would be great to find the way into really understanding that, and maybe offering some suggestions as to how we could help, how we could change things.
Yeah, definitely. Someone can make it right now. That's an idea. So,
yeah, that'd be great.
We have to wrap quickly. What's each of your favorite documentaries? James, do you have one? Ron needs to think, I think.
Yeah, I need to think. I probably need. I'm bad with titles. I've got to look at titles.
Well, whoever has one can.
Well, all things Alex Gibney, not to be too general, but amazing.
We were really inspired by Asif Kapadia's work, who obviously won the Oscar for Emmy, but the first film that really put him on the map, which was Senna, which he made about the Brazilian racing driver.
Great movie.
Fantastic movie. And the treatment of archive in it, they took the archive from the 80s and 90s and recut it as though they were their rushes into brand new scenes. And the whole concept of having the people narrating it and talking about it out of vision the whole time. So you never ever broke the bubble of being in that archive. I think it was a really impressive, sort of brave kind of turn of the wheel in the whole kind of documentary genre. So, we'll credit to him for that. I think it's a great documentary.
Yeah, it's great. Amy, do you have one?
Well, I have a lot of favorites, but I'll just pick one just because of the genre, which I thought was, I loved Hands on a Hard Body, which was a great look into a small slice of life. I just thought it was a great investigation on stakes and what things mean to people. And I just remember watching that film and thinking, oh, documentaries can be like this too. Like it was just a completely immersive experience, that experience. And it had real stakes and real characters and a real point of view. So that was I revisit that a lot. I just think it's a great, great film.
Yeah. Okay. James, Ron, do you guys have one yet?
Yeah, I do. Go ahead, James.
Well, I was just going to say, from a sort of wilderness perspective, I always enjoyed Touching the Void. I thought that was amazing. I also, from an ocean point of view, I enjoyed Seaspiracy, such a sort of provocation. That was fun to watch. Got a conversation going, which I admire.
Well, Free Solo, of course, as I mentioned, Alex Gibney, more than I can mention, but I'm always riveted by his work. But the Adam Curtis movies, I go back and watch Century of Self, kind of every few years, and also Power of Nightmares, and so inventive, so amazingly inventive, and yet so, to me, fascinating.
Well, it was great speaking with all of you. Thank you so much for your time. You guys gave a lot of documentary viewing options for everyone to check out now. Thank you so much, and congratulations on all of your wonderful projects, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you
So much,
everybody.